And we are live.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. I am your host for today, Joe Benning, the chair. I represent the Caledonia Orange District, which is all of Caledonia County and the 6 northeasternmost towns of Orange County. Today is January 14th, 2022. And today is going to be a fun day for this committee. We've had a very hard and long week and have been looking forward to this conversation very much. We're going to talk about historical preservation and other associated things. In getting to where we need to be, I'm first going to introduce Senator Ingalls from Essex-Orleans, Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, Senator McCormick from Windsor County, and we will be joined probably in a few minutes by Senator Parent, who had another obligation that he had to attend to, and he's from Franklin County. For the purposes of today's conversation, I'm going to give my normal spiel for all those of you who may not have been here before. We are broadcasting live on YouTube. I try to keep the conversation at a low level for the people who may not be familiar with some of the vernacular that many of you happen to use from time to time. So if it gets to a point where you're talking, I'll use my vernacular, you're talking about a Rule of Criminal Procedure 12D. I know what it's all about, but probably none of you do. And the bottom line is we need to make sure we stop and explain whatever we are talking about so that people do understand. So if you're rambling right along and trying to give us a presentation about something you're familiar with, and I hear something that would red flag for me the possible misunderstanding of somebody on the outside of this conversation, I'll probably interrupt you and just ask you to explain X, Y, or Z. To begin the conversation, my schedule has Laura Treshman first. And Laura, you know the routine, but in presenting yourself, you'll give the fine example of how each witness should be testifying today. You basically tell us who you are, what you are all about in the workable world, and how you fit into the conversation that we're talking about today. And then you'll just take the floor and run with it. The committee will end up having some questions along the way. You'll be free to have an interaction. We have some time we can spend with you today, and I hope that everybody has fun while we're here today, because my committee really has worked hard this week and we need some good laughing. Laura, I'm going to turn it right over to you. Having said that, welcome back to Senate Institutions. And you have to unmute yourself first.
Yes, thank you very much. For the record,
there you are. Okay, we lost your picture there for me.
For the record, I am Laura Treshman, the Vermont State Historic Preservation Officer, and I have the honor to work with the Division for Historic Preservation. I am in my 8th year in that role. So today we were going to talk about the Division for Historic Preservation's asks. So I can bring up the screen, hopefully.
Part of the fun of this is being able to see how skillful everybody is at using screen share.
Yeah, not so much.
I couldn't.
Good, fine.
So you can see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to give you a quick overview, because I'm pretty sure that we'll come back and get into detail once you have the capital bill and crossover. But in the capital bill, we have the underwater preserves at $25,000, which we're going to talk about later this afternoon with our fabulous partners, the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. Last year, you also gave us an additional one-time $10,000 to study 4 sites and open 2 of them, explore opening 2 of them. We also have the Roadside Historic Site Markers at $25,000 a year. This is the 75th year of that program. And next week, I am presenting to the Vermont Advisory Council our 300th application. So we're really very, very excited. That program could always use more funding, but if that's the case, it needs more staff. Because it's usually just me in my spare time. But I have to say that spare time is usually when I need a reprieve and love to dive into history. Just this morning, I did the marker applications for the Guilford Grange Hall and for Ralph Waldo Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man while he was staying in Fayetteville. We also have the Unmarked Burial Fund, which you may recall from a couple of years ago is a static fund that we use for emergency purposes. In September of 2020, we ended up using the funds to get the archaeology team on board to excavate, remove the remains of a construction project in Burlington of the War of 1812 soldiers. Those remains are going to be reinterred this spring over at Lakeside Cemetery in Burlington. So that is an emergency fund for us. The barn grants and the historic preservation grants are now up to $300,000, which is an absolutely wonderful increase of $100,000 for those. They still are pressured where we get more applications than we can fund. The historic preservation grants were just awarded this past December, and the barn grants will be awarded in February. The ask is typically up around $600,000 a year. And we're able to do probably about 20 projects in each now with this additional funding. The biggest star that we have with you through the capital construction bill is major maintenance for our state historic sites. And I am just ecstatic to be able to say that we officially no longer own the New Haven Depot, which was transferred to the town of New Haven as part of its relocation adventure.
Anybody see that on TV the other night? Moving it
Yes.
down? Quite exciting.
Yes, yes. This is actually my second testimony today with Senator Mazza. So
Yeah.
That's actually, Laura, that's one of our success stories. And I just want to pause to say, watching that building get picked up and moved down the road at 1 mile an hour, I was thrilled to see that on TV.
I was thrilled and could have been brought to tears if it hadn't been 5 below. But yeah, I was really, really very excited. It was a hard-won victory in that there are a lot of, and I don't mean this pun, but a lot of moving parts, right? We had to get the railroad on board, VTrans, the town, and I will say the community of New Haven never hesitated when we said, do you want this building? They immediately said yes, and we're partners from the very start. And I am just so excited to see this building have a third life.
Mr. Chair, it's amazing what $500,000 will do.
Yes, it is. And what was it, 83 wheels or something like that we were under the truck to get that to move?
Yes.
I was really impressed, and I
don't know how they moved it. All that brick that those brick have been there hundreds of years, they upgraded, but to move a building like that is just amazing.
Yeah, I'm very proud of this committee for its participation in getting that project together. That's leaves me feeling very fine on a Friday afternoon. Sorry,
Mr.
Laura,
Chairman, I didn't think it could be done. I didn't think you could move a brick building.
I didn't either. Never
Yeah.
dreamed it would not all fall apart.
It's wrapped very tightly in a metal frame. All of the windows have been removed for their preservation. And the interior elements have all been removed for restoration and will be put back based on their historic nature and association with the building. I honestly was surprised that some of the slate tiles didn't come off the roof because there's a few on the railroad side that are deteriorated, but she's moving along and it's really exciting.
We have a time frame as to when it's supposed to be installed in its new location?
It will go into the parking lot next to the town hall at the very latest by the 22nd of this month. And then this spring, the foundation will be constructed. And it will probably be moved on to the foundation sometime this year.
Great.
So our major maintenance actually continues to take care of our state historic sites. many of which have deferred maintenance, many of which have ongoing maintenance. We have buildings that date from the 18th century all the way up to the late 20th century. I will add that those from the 20th century seem to be wearing out a lot faster than our oldest buildings. So construction techniques matter. But the one thing that I really wanted to get into a pressure that we have right now is our agricultural buildings. We own a number of barns. We are going to outside sources for some of the major projects that we're undertaking. We just received a Save America's Treasures grant for the Justin Morrill site in Stratford to assess the drainage and water issues. The senator constructed this magnificent house at the bottom of a mountain, and the water just comes straight down into the foundation and goes up the plaster walls and freezes in the winter. So we're going to address, starting with archaeology, address the drainage issues at that site and take care of that one. Then we have to move to the agricultural buildings on that site. And we have a year-long study being undertaken at the Bennington Monument, which will help address the ongoing maintenance issues, the mortar deterioration, the stone is starting to fall. We have ongoing issues with the elevator, even though it's not that old. There's centuries of light fixtures on the inside of the building and electrical that we're working on as well. So they're studying the impacts of the different weather, the seasons on the building, because in that case as well, we get ice on the inside. And when it rains, it pours on the inside. So we're studying that to see how best to address it. We have maintenance reports and recommendations going back to the 1920s for several of our buildings, but now we're really diving in. We've got a great director of preservation and historic site section chief that are really tackling these projects and making sure that public safety is foremost, as well as proper stewardship of these resources. But there's one in particular project that I want to bring to your attention. It is the Blanchard barn at Plymouth Notch. This is part of the President Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site. It is off to the side of the main village. It was purchased by the state from John and Florence Coolidge in 1991. This building is really amazing. The oldest portion of it was constructed about 1792 by Ephraim Moore, who is one of the very first settlers in Plymouth Notch, probably arriving at the same time as the Coolidge family. 5 generations of Moores and Blanchards have used this barn, and the Moores, the Blanchards, and the Coolidges are all related by marriage. The original structure was either constructed in 2 phases and then attached, or as one large barn, but it has since grown to include animal stalls, a milk house, a sheep barn, and a tractor carriage shed. I cannot stress enough the significance of this resource. It's one of the few remaining late 18th century timber frame barns in Vermont. It shows early scribe rule construction, which I'll show you a picture of. And it documents the evolution of hill farming from the late 19th century to the mid 20th century. When we received ownership in 1991, we knew we had structural issues. Those have not yet been addressed except on an emergency basis, so that there's distortion of the framing causing the joinery to disengage, the roof is leaking, and that's causing the plate to rot and rafter segments to pull apart. Also, groundwater and drainage are a big part of the problem. So the section of the building, the gabled section, which I'll show you other pictures of, dates from about 1792. And then the building evolves with the addition of the sheep barn in the 1850s. The tractor shed around the turn of the century, and then you get the concrete stalls added in the 1940s, and then the milk house, which originally was a separate building, added on around the 1950s. The Moore Blanchard house was across the street, and that burned. And then that's when ownership starts to change for this property. Here you can see various angles of it. So again, this gabled section is the oldest part of the building. These are the scribe marks I was talking about. We had a timber framer come look at this building a number of times, and he is just really in awe and thrilled by the details of it. The scribe marks tell you how to put the building together so that each part is individually attached to another one, like a puzzle. You cannot interchange these pieces. And this will also help us as we start to dismantle it to be able to study it, restore it, and put it back together. The north wall between the westbound barn East Drive bent and the common wall are currently our biggest threat because those are becoming detached. The plate's missing, the beam ends are rotted, and there's 4 rafters that have deteriorated. Much of the joinery along the common wall is disengaged, and as I mentioned, there's water being a problem. So there's also heaving in the ground, and you can see where we have stabilized with blocks underneath some of these posts. The ground heaves up, the snow piles up on the roof in the winters, and then in the summer, those posts are left to swing on their own. So we regularly have to maintain this during different weather. And here you can see where some of the posts and beams and supports are all disengaging, where they would fit in like a puzzle. Tinker Toys. We have estimated, working with the premier timber framers here in Vermont, that to document and disassemble the framing is our first priority so that we can understand the pressure points as it starts to come apart. It's putting pressure on other parts of the building. So we're thinking that's about $80,000 to $100,000. The foundation repairs and the grading that needs to take place is estimated at $125,000. And then we think the reconstruction restoration would come in at about $160,000. And we know we could get grants and the Timber Framers Guild and use this as a project to reconstruct it. But I think we're really pressed right at the moment for that first $100,000 to document and disassemble so that we're not doing emergency work all the time that just kicks the can down the road and threatens this building. We did just have a timber framer there for $15,000 just to shore it up so we could get it to the spring when he has to come back. Despite the fact that we've owned this building since 1991, we have not had a true interpretation plan. But our hope is to use it for agricultural and education purposes, showing farming from the late 19th and 20th century. Ephraim Moore and his son Thomas were both legislators like yourself. And so we would like to be able to show, maybe even have animals in this resource, use it as it was originally constructed and continue to evolve, and show what farming was like during the life of a budding president of the United States. Calvin Coolidge was guided by what he learned and knew here in Plymouth Notch and from the families of the Moores and the Blanchards and the Coolidges. We are not at the moment fully interpreting his farming life and what he was exposed to. So we feel that this is a big missing piece in our puzzle. We also are looking at the retirement of Bill Jenny, the regional historic site administrator for the Calvin Coolidge site, who's been with us for nearly 34 years, and he retires in 2 months. So we would really like to start having some of his dreams put into play, such as the protection of this resource so that we could continue to use it. So as I said, this is our biggest pressure right now. And we've done a number of projects with the major maintenance money that we already have, that you increased this year, which was absolutely wonderful. And some of that is the New Haven Depot. It's going to get a new roof and we're going to assist with the foundation with some of our major maintenance money. But I think this is our biggest pressure right now, is the preservation of this building. So we can talk about this one a little bit more if you want, or I can move into the marker that we have.
I'd like to get into the marker because we have probably till about 3 o'clock or so to try to get everybody in.
Perfect. So over this past year, I was getting some emails from Senator Benning and a couple of other people related to a marker for Dinah in Windsor. We were already working with Historic Windsor on an application. So I wanted to update you. We received the application in January, a year ago. We worked over the winter and spring on the revisions of the text, working with a historian, Historic Windsor staff, a lot of back and forth. By October, we had the text approved and we posted it for public review. We presented it to the Vermont Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. They approve all markers and the text locations. They unanimously approved it, and the marker was ordered in October of last year. We expect it to be delivered to our warehouse, probably February, March, to be installed sometime this spring. We had first account documentation from the historian and Historic Windsor on Stephen Jacobs' life. The building where it's going to stand in front of was his house where Dinah lived. He was an attorney in Windsor and ended up being appointed to the Vermont Supreme Court. We do actually have the ownership papers where he purchases Dinah, who then ultimately was removed from his care. We don't know exactly why. She either left on her own, which doesn't seem likely, but she was no longer living there or being cared for by them. It might coincide with the period where he is appointed as Supreme Court judge. Anyway, the town actually pushed back and said, you need to support her. She sought out support from the town. The town asked her to leave a couple times. They even voted on it. Ultimately, it ended up being the selectmen of Windsor versus Stephen Jacobs going all the way up to the Supreme Court. He obviously had to recuse himself. And it was the case that the Supreme Court felt Vermonters should not be owning slaves. And at this time, I think she was in her 40s, late 40s, and unable to really take care of herself. She'd been ill for a long time and had no finances of her own. The case became very important because it was the first of its kind in the United States. Vermont's anti-slavery constitution was upheld when the bill of sales was not allowed to be admitted as evidence. And also that the master had responsibility for the care of his slaves, but that she was not viewed as a slave because in Vermont, you cannot have slaves. So it was a little bit of a roundabout. She did continue to live in Windsor for another 30 years. She died and the town paid for her medical services while she was sick. They paid for her coffin. We don't know exactly where she's buried, but it is someplace in Windsor, and they advertised it in the newspapers, and they did bell tolling, which makes us think that by that time, you know, she was really well known for the case that she put before, and the town and community members were taking care of her. So we have a two-sided marker that starts with her story when she first arrives in Windsor, 1783, and all the way to the end where she is buried in probably Windsor. As I said, we worked with historians and Historic Windsor to really wordsmith this, to be careful not to say something that was not exactly correct or could be misleading or was not fully understood. I think what makes this marker really special is that we're giving you enough to make you want to learn more, to continue to explore and learn about Dinah. And the decision was also made just to put her first name, because the other names that were applied to her, last names, were given to her by slave owners and white people. So it was fair just to call her Dinah. So the marker is going to go right in front of the house, which is white in this picture, but it is yellow right now. Right in front, in the town right of way. And it, as I said, it should be done this spring.
We're going to talk some more about this with other witnesses, but I just wanted to pause here. Evidently, we have a problem with the portrait of Matthew Lyons just outside our committee room's door. Has there been any discussion about what to do now that we've learned Matt left Vermont, went to Kentucky, and ended up with 10 slaves?
We were working on a marker for him, and we've put that on hold till we get some more information. I don't know about the portrait.
So we are having conversation about that.
Yes.
All very interesting. Okay, I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
No, I have concluded the marker discussion.
Okay.
Chairman, can you,
Sure.
can I get oriented where in Windsor the Dinah site is? What am I looking at in this picture?
This is Stephen Jacobs' house, and it is right on State Street across from the Windsor prison.
Okay, now I know where I am. Thank you.
We're going to have some more conversation about that particular building in a couple of days.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I don't want to bring up this past week. Let's keep moving forward. Committee, any questions for Laura up to date?
Madam
Sure,
Chair,
go ahead.
who designs all the plaques or the
historical roadside markers?
yeah, who does, you have a company or something who does that, or?
We have a company in Ohio, Siwa Studios. They have been making them for the state of Vermont since 1947. They make most of the markers for the states across the country.
Huh. Why are they made special or something? I mean, are they special material? We can't do that at our facilities here, no?
They're not special material. They're just aluminum. I'm not exactly sure what the font is because they keep that secret. But they seem to be doing a thriving business.
Okay, because you said it takes a long time to get one. You said it was ordered a year ago or something?
It does take a little, yes, it takes a while because they're doing them for other states as well as the Daughters of the American Revolution and other such markers like this.
Wow.
But we have a really great process where we're sending at least 8 to 10 back every year for restoration, and they're sending them in groups back to us.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good place to interject, Dick. Years ago, when you and I were on this committee, the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Cedar Creek in Middletown, Virginia was coming up. And Howard Coffin had approached us asking if we could somehow do something during that celebration that they were going to have down in Middletown, Virginia. And the idea came in that we would get one of those green and gold roadside historical markers and see if we couldn't plant it on the battlefield. As luck would have it, I do a lot of motorcycle riding. So I said I'd take the time to go down the Shenandoah River Valley as a fun trip and stop in Middletown to see where we could possibly locate one of those. And the whole trip was about a day and a half with the National Park Service trying to figure out where we could put it. There's private property, there's public property surrounding the battlefield. And I struck out after trying to find a place, and I called Howard Coffin back in Vermont. I was standing in the lobby of a museum just south of the battlefield, and I'm lamenting the fact that I was unsuccessful in trying to locate a place. And as luck would have it, at that moment, there's a guy in the corner of my eye kind of circling around, listening to my conversation in the lobby of this museum. And when I hung up the phone, he said, "Why don't you put it on our land?" And it turned out to be the president of the Battlefield Foundation, which was an entity I did not even know existed. And lo and behold, they had a plot of land literally on the edge of the battlefield, overlooking the battlefield on Route 11, what they call Route 11, also known as the Valley Pike locally. But it's the main thoroughfare that runs up and down the Shenandoah River Valley. And as further luck would have it, the site overlooked a farmhouse still in existence on the battlefield, in which many wounded Vermont soldiers were put when they were wounded during the battle. And as the battle raged all around them, it changed, the farmhouse location changed possession, if you will, between the Confederates and the Union. But one of the soldiers was a guy who later became a legislator, and he's featured right in the middle of that painting in the Cedar Creek room. He's a red-haired, red-bearded captain of the 6th Vermont. His name was Thomas Kennedy, and he's being carried off the battlefield. That farmhouse that he was put in is still in existence, and this particular site overlooks that. So they graciously allowed us to put it on their land at no cost. And then Howard had to design the language that would be placed on the sign. A lot of people don't realize somebody's got to actually put the words down that will end up on the sign. And I don't know if you remember this part, Dick, but it took a couple of tries with Howard back and forth because he's really a champion of Vermont history, but Virginians may not necessarily appreciate what he was talking about. So some diplomatic language changes took place. And I'm very proud to say that today I still get pictures of Vermonters who have stopped next to it. And thankfully, there's not a bullet hole in it yet.
We monitor that. We have a staffer whose family is in Virginia, so I get updates on that. And I'm also in contact with a couple of historians down in deeper south, Chattanooga and New Orleans, who are asking if it's possible to get Vermont markers down there.
Just so you know, Laura, the Virginia authorities who were at that celebration were thoroughly impressed by the quality and appearance of our roadside historical markers. If any of you have gone through Virginia, they have these kind of dull gray and brown signs for their historical roadside markers, but ours stands out like no tomorrow on that battlefield. So nice work.
Thank you.
I have Scott Dillon, but I don't know whether Scott Dillon was planning on having a conversation about this subject. If you were, Scott, welcome to Senate Institutions.
Yes, good afternoon, Senator. I don't have anything formal to present. I'm here for backup for Laura.
Okay. Laura, you already began the conversation of the marker for Dinah Mason. And my next witness in that conversation, unless you have something else you wanted to say, Laura, about that, is Rachel Bogart, still a student at Vermont Law School, as I understand it. Yep. Rachel, welcome back.
They let me in for the next semester. Thank you, Senator Benning, for having me. And Laura, it's nice to put a face to the name as you've been working with Judy Hayward of Historic Windsor and Amanda Jordan Smith of the Windsor Town Select Board. I am a student at Vermont Law School, and I'm kind of working on the legal aspect of this very interesting case and history. And before that, I was an educator at Windsor State Street School. And 2 years ago, almost nobody in the town had heard of this. Lifetime residents, nobody really had known. Plenty of people have known about the prison and some other, the Precision Museum and the Constitution House in Windsor. But not many people knew of this story. And due to that, there was a lot of controversy over how the story was being told. Having access to a lot of legal research, we've been able to uncover some different documents that I presented to Judy. So between 1791 and 1860, the Vermont Census Bureau had 16, quote, Negro slaves written on their census reports. And in 1860, they had gone back and said that was a mistake made on behalf of residents. Since there have never been slaves in Vermont, we are changing that statistics to, quote, free colored persons. So there's Chief Justice Watson, who served on the Vermont Supreme Court from 1917 to 1929. This is well over 100 years after Chief Justice or Justice Jacob, who only served for 2 or 3 years. So arguably Chief Justice Watson is the more successful justice. He has a great 1921 address to the Montpelier Vermont Bar Association. And believe it or not, it was January 7th, 1921. So just about a century later, we're still talking about this. And he calls for just the rhetoric of, oh, there can be no slaves in Vermont. Vermont air is too clean for a slaveholder to breathe. And he's very metaphorical. And he's like, really, are we going to take this and really think that this was the way it went out? Or are we going to say, this story needs to be remolded and told in a way that doesn't sweep this under the rug? So that is in 1921. And here we are in 2022 talking about the same thing. And I can certainly pick up that address. It's 13 pages. Additionally, the Vermont Law School incoming class, out of 189 students, 111 of those, including every Black, Indigenous, and person of color who's enrolled in the Vermont 1L class, at least as far as I know, has signed. So it's 111 signatures out of 189 students that would support legislative support, because the town select board and they're not really getting funding for historic Windsor, and not any particular number, but I know Judy will take funding anywhere she can get it. So we'll look into that. And that would just be for the projected $1 million project to make the Jacob House up and running again. So they're taking donations from everywhere, but to honor Dinah, she took care of children and gardens, and with the historic Windsor, last time I spoke, and Laura, please correct me if Judy has a different vision, they're thinking of a community center, community garden, and some kind of childcare or lower school, rather than a museum or an institute or something more local and to the town to honor Dinah's life. Additionally, when the marker's in, I know the town select board member, Amanda Smith, she was talking about on June 19th, so Juneteenth, like the freedom date for BIPOC community in this country. Juneteenth, Dean Shirley Jefferson, who is arguably the most famous civil rights activist in Vermont that I can think of. She personally knew Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King Day is coming up this Monday. So she'll have an address regarding that. She hiked at Selma or walked Selma with MLK, and she has agreed to speak at a Juneteenth unveiling, and I'm sure she would have some great words. Senator Benning mentioned something to do with a press conference, and whatever it is, Dean Jefferson, I think, would be a great person to speak. So as of right now, that's the next thing we have solid is on June 19th of 2022. There's going to be some type of event where we unveil the monument and have the VPR or some kind of press conference to just cover Shirley Jefferson's speech. And that's the next thing for right now. And I'm sure you guys will be talking to Historic Windsor about the building in the future. And Laura, let me know if I covered everything there. And Senator Benning, let me know if that's everything, and I can field some questions from you all now if you have any. Thank you.
Just the first thing that pops into my head, sometimes we all get lost in our daily schedules to the point where we forget about things that are really important. And getting somebody who is at the spear tip, if you will, of this conversation to remember that there are folks who might want to show up for that press conference. I'd love to have the governor there. I'd love to have our Senate and House of Representatives folks there. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of politicians that would like to be there, but
My district.
Yeah,
It's my
it's your
district.
district,
I
right.
want to be there.
There's probably all kinds of Windsor State senators that'll be there. There's at least 3 of them that I know of. Anyway, the bottom line is we really should try to make this a big event. And if you could at least put in the back of your brain, I'd love to get a reminder call about a month and a half ahead of time so that I don't miss it. I'd love to be there.
Absolutely.
The other question that I had for you personally was, how's school going?
It's hard. It's in law school, B's are the new A's. You know, it's like medical school. It's quite difficult, but it's a great community surrounded by a lot of brilliant people. And please do let me know if any of you all need some workers over the summer, because I'll be available. And I look forward to working with you at least till June, but hopefully into the future. Now I'm gonna go and study, but thank you so much, Senator Benning, Senator Ingalls, Maza, McCormick. Appreciate your time. And Laura,
Good luck.
all your help. Thank you so
Good
much.
luck.
All right, look forward to seeing you all at the press conference on June 19th.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Sometimes folklore gets confused with scholarship. There's a story I've always heard, and since you're mentioning judges, Vermont judges and slavery, are you familiar with the slave owner an enslaver who wanted to recover a runaway slave, and that the Vermont judge said, well, under the Fugitive Slave Act, as the Constitution as interpreted by the court, a slave is property, and therefore it is your right to reclaim your property. But in Vermont, we have something called a title search. And for you to claim your property, you have to prove that your property is indeed yours. And so you've got to go back to the original owner. So please produce a title and a quitclaim deed from God. And failing to do that, you cannot have this person is not your property. That's a story that I've heard dozens of times. Is anyone aware of whether that's actually true?
I am actually aware of that story as well from my mentor, Graham Newell, who was a Vermont history professor. But the version that I heard was he was responsible for producing a bill of sale in the court. And when he produced a piece of paper, the judge looked at it and said, words to the effect, "No, sir, a bill of sale from Almighty God." That was the version that I'd heard.
Okay,
There's a marker in Middlebury marking where the courthouse was where that took place.
So that is actually true. That's actually solid
Yes.
history. It's not folklore.
Yes.
Senator
Great.
McCormick, I can tell you, talking to the contracts professor and the dean of students, he was saying that the only reason there was a court case is because Jacobs and the town select board members in their little battle, there was standing to sue. So at this point, you can't go back and do anything with the contract. So according to all the law professors, pretty much the only thing to do at this rate would to be to have a constitutional convention and change the words ought to not own a slave to shall not. And that was kind of the caveat, is with the positive language, that it was more like frowned upon rather than enforceable. That helps at all.
Good description.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Rachel, again. Good luck. We are going to switch from land-based to water-based and welcome Susan Evans Mcclure, the Executive Director of the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. First, we're going to talk about Lake Champlain Maritime Museum's needs. And then we're going to talk about what Joe did during his summer vacation. So, Susan, welcome to Senate Institutions.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Let me just share my screen here too. Some lovely images for you all to look at. And we can imagine that it is not 10 degrees and snowing as it is in my house. But so for the record, my name is Susan Evans Mcclure. I'm the executive director at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. Thank you, Senator Benning, and to the committee for inviting us here today and giving us the opportunity to share a bit more about our work. And we especially appreciate the partnership with Laura and the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation and are grateful for the committee's support of that work as well. So this is a sunny day on our 3-acre waterfront campus located just outside of Virgins. We are a museum dedicated to inspiring people to make personal connections to Lake Champlain. And we really believe that when people see themselves in the past, then they make a stronger commitment to building a better future for all of us and for the lake and for our communities. The museum opened in 1985, and today we welcome over 10,000 students and visitors each year to experience our exhibits and our boat building programs and our educational outreach. When we reopened last year after COVID, we decided to stop charging admission and offer all of our summer camps to kids on a pay what you can model. Our focus now is really on access. And we're also working to make the lake and the lake's underwater cultural heritage more accessible to everyone. So all of the work at the museum that we do in partnership with the state is really about 3 things when it comes to underwater cultural resources, which is the insider term for shipwrecks. We are all about preservation, education, and safe access. And actually, a piece of federal legislation called the Abandoned Shipwreck Act was adopted in 1987. And this law divested ownership of shipwrecks from the federal government to the states in which they are submerged. The legislation states that it's actually the state's responsibility to provide what the law calls, quote, reasonable access. And that is what the preserve system does and what we do in partnership with Laura and her team. The resources under the water belong to the state and to the people of Vermont too. So that's something we're really passionate about, is making sure people feel connected to these amazing stories and ships. So we mentioned that we manage the underwater historic preserves, currently 9 preserves in the system. And every year the museum maintains the preserves. We do regular dives on the sites to check for damage or safety hazards. We install and deinstall the buoys seasonally. We maintain a database of diver registrations. We update the website with videos and information and photographs and models. And we're really a central spot of information and safety information, and most importantly, for divers who are looking to access these sites. We do a lot of work working with and training the dive community and have great relationships with them, which means that when they find things, as they are doing more and more, they come to us and we can ensure with the state that those objects and artifacts are preserved properly. A great example of this that we shared in committee last year, I believe, was the discovery of the paddle wheels from the steamboat Phoenix. Those were originally found by a diver. And that diver was someone we had a relationship with at the museum. And he came to us pretty quickly and said, hey, I found something. What do you think it is? And we were able to work through the process with him to ensure their proper preservation. So we know that divers are finding these shipwrecks. If anyone has seen the way fish finders have gotten better over time, that's one example of how the technology has increased at a pretty phenomenal rate. So more people are finding shipwrecks more easily, whether we intend them to or not. So our focus really is on training and safety for public access. The museum also has started creating 3D models of all of our shipwrecks to examine them in more detail and to give non-divers like myself the experience of being with those shipwrecks. So Chris is going to just put in the chat a link to one of the 3D models. This is just a picture of the model, but you can feel free to click on the link and play with it for a while. You'll probably be so enthralled you won't even listen to me. So this may be not a great technique of a presentation, but it's really cool. And the model that you're looking at here is of the General Butler, which was an 1862 class sailing canal boat that sunk just outside of the Burlington Breakwater in 1876. So photogrammetry is basically binocular vision. It's similar to like one of those little handheld stereoscopes. If I guess you, like me, need things in 19th century terminology, it's a very fancy stereoscope. It uses multiple angles of thousands of images to create 3D imagery. But now, instead of just holding it in front of your face, it's a computer making calculations between hundreds or thousands of images finding the common points and distances between the image and using it to create a 3D model. It uses pixel data that's common between images to determine the distance and orientation between points. So in addition to the people who access the preserve system, and last year that was around 500 diver visits, we also are really focused on doing this new work to get the preserves out to people who are not going underwater. So while there are 500 people last year, 500 visits to the preserves last year, we had over 10,000 visits to our online and educational experiences with preserve shipwrecks as well. And while we have been expanding digital access and continuing to maintain the sites underwater, we've also been experiencing the same cost increases that everyone has. And the reality is that the funding for this program has steadily declined since 2018. We previously had, for many years, had stable funding of $35,000 a year, but now our annual budget is down to $25,000 a year. So that means since 2018, we've had about $30,000 less funding overall than we need to adequately maintain these sites. So we've been operating under budget, and it is, there are results to that now. It's beginning to show a little. We always prioritize immediate safety projects, but that means we now have a $30,000 backlog of other projects, some about preservation and some about safety. These include new signage, new downlines, a few mooring blocks, and some improvements that we are really committed to making to make the preserves more safe for the public. Returning to our $35,000 annual funding line that we'd previously received will allow us to continue to do this important work, and with a particular focus on safety. We never want to be in a position to cut safety due to available funds. And while these shipwrecks are amazing and we want people to access them, diving is dangerous and can be dangerous. Safety, both for the divers and for these state-owned resources, are always top of mind for us and for the state. So one of the things I'd like to request today is that you consider returning the line item to the current 9 preserves to $35,000 a year. Last year, as Laura mentioned, you also created additional funding to open 2 new sites, which is amazing. We're very grateful for that opportunity. We do not have additional funding to maintain them. We do have funding to open them. So with the opening of those 2 new sites that I'll talk about briefly, the total needed to operate the 11 sites in the preserves would be $43,000 a year. It's about $4,000 per shipwreck per year. So I will talk a bit about these new sites. It's exciting. We were, like I said, we were thrilled that the legislature was supportive of opening new sites in the system, and we did receive that $10,000, and we're working on the first 2 new sites that we're looking to open. The first is the Pine Street Barge Canal Graveyard. We need a shorter name for it, but Pine Street Barge Canal Graveyard snorkeling site and the Providence Island Canal Boat Shipwreck. And we've begun archaeological assessment on both. And actually this fall, we brought a group of students through the Burlington City and Lake semester snorkeling at the site and they had an amazing day. You can see them all in the water here. And we're really looking forward to expanding the opportunity for more kids and people to access these sites through snorkeling. We've begun conversations with the community in Burlington, including with Burlington's Parks and Recs department, to discuss site safety and access. How do you actually get to this from the bike path? One immediate issue that's come up is the need for cyanobacteria monitoring of the site. We will hopefully be piggybacking with the City of Burlington's cyanobacteria monitoring contract. And then we will be updating the website as those conditions allow the site to be safely accessed, but that is going to be an additional annual cost as well. So in addition to taking people out there, we've been doing research to open the site. This is a 3D model of the remains of the shipwreck of the ship Excelsior, which was a lake schooner cargo ship built in 1850 in Willsboro, New York. It was abandoned in Burlington in 1884. And the model presents the forward half of the vessel, including a number of curved frames, the foremast step, and the bow timbers, which are pressed up against the stone breakwater that help to protect the entrance to the Pine Street Barge Canal. Strangely, a significant portion of the stern of the same vessel is located about 100 yards away from where this wreck sits. They were probably separated during breakwater maintenance operations, and one of the things we're excited about is we're already learning new things through this process of documenting the sites. So that's what's happening in Burlington. And we've also been doing modern dives on the other location called the Providence Island Canal boat shipwreck. This boat is pretty amazing. These are some images of it here. You can still see the paint. You can't in this picture because it's, it's hard to get a great color photograph underwater in Lake Champlain if you've ever looked in there. But the ship is incredible. You can still see the blue paint on the side of the boat. The deck has objects on it. On the left here, you can actually see a small flower pot that was on the deck of the ship. These are boats that people lived on. Families lived on these. Families lived on a lot of these boats. And there's so many objects on the below deck on the boat too, including all of the household items of the family that would have lived there. But all these same things that make it incredible also mean that it will take significant work to open it safely. So we'll be documenting the wreck with photogrammetry, taking measurements, managing the artifacts. So what we do, we have to remove the artifacts before we can open it to divers. We want to minimize risk to the artifacts and minimize the word I'm looking for. We don't want people to see them and think, oh, I could take that, because you cannot take that. So we remove all the objects so they're not visible. And there's two ways for us to do that, and they really depend on funding. One, which is definitely underwater archaeology acceptable and best practice, is to actually remove them from the boat and bury them alongside the site, marking very clearly where they are in our records, but not making them visible to the public. So we remove them and kind of rebury them. Another thing we can do is take them out of the water and conserve them. Of course, that needs an extra layer of funding to go through and conserve the objects. But then we can make the objects accessible to people on land so that they can look at them too. For this boat, going inside the wreck will never be safely accessible. So we're also looking at where we need to include signage and additional materials to ensure that people actually don't enter the shipwreck. So this year we're working to document these, go through the objects, and continue to document the two additional sites mentioned in last year's legislation, the Potash Point Canal boat and the Isle La Motte shipwreck site. So as you heard me describe, opening these sites safely is a big project and one we're excited about. And we're targeting the spring of 2023 to open these two sites, which is 1 year later than was outlined in the original legislation. But it's going to take a while to get through what's on there and do it safely. But we'll have them open by the spring of 2023. And then we hope to have the additional two sites open probably by 2025. I also wanted to, I'm realizing I just jumped in and Laura was going to say something at the beginning, but what she was going to say, maybe she wasn't. Okay, great. I didn't jump the gun. One of the other things we do with the state of Vermont is that we are an official state repository for underwater archaeological collections. So that's a lot of words, but what it means is that we provide curatorial services and storage for objects that are recovered from state sites underwater. We actually have the same agreement with the US Navy. So we're an official repository for the state of Vermont and the US Navy. So that means we provide space and collections, storage, archival packing, monitoring, documenting, paperwork, and keeping them and making them accessible for the public and for researchers. There's no financial agreement that we have with the state for this. The public really benefits, our museum visitors benefit, and it's something that we're very committed to doing, but it's not something that has a financial agreement attached to it. And this object is something that was pulled off of the General Butler when we were opening that site up to the public. It's actually a toy canal boat that we found on a canal boat. And it's one of my favorite objects in the museum. Families lived on these boats with their kids. And this object is it's just incredible to me. It immediately transports you to the mid-19th century. So if you were a child growing up on a canal boat, what do you have to play with? A toy boat that looks like the boat you're living on. And then last summer, we were able to make a 3D model of this toy as well. So you can go to I think maybe Chris is going to maybe put a link to that one too. And you can go to that one and kind of look at it and play with it through your virtual screen in ways that, it's a historic object. So you could not, even if you were looking at it at the museum, you could not pick it up and turn it upside down. But through the magic of technology that we're using here, you can look at it from all sides. You can spin it around. You can really get a sense of it as a tangible object, but from your computer. This unfunded responsibility we have for these objects does put pressure on the museum's budget, and we continue to seek other funding sources in partnership with the state for this and to other philanthropic funders. The more sites we open, the more collections we're also going to have to manage. And we're happy to do so. And we really feel like sharing these collections with the public is an important part of our mission and something we're committed to. We do estimate that it costs us at between $10,000 to $15,000 a year to steward these collections from the underwater preserve sites. And I wanted to show you one more photogrammetry image and just mention this photogrammetry technique a little bit more. So when photogrammetry models are done properly, as we do them, they're actually scale and geo-referenced models. So you can use this 3D image to take measurements and actually pinpoint exactly where you are on the globe and where the object is and the size and the scale. They're cool to look at and play with, but they also have real research value. So not only are we working to do this with every site in the preserve system, there are also many, many, many other shipwrecks that are out there that are not in the preserve system, but they are the responsibility of the state. And we know, as I mentioned, that people are finding these sites more than ever, and which does, as well-intentioned as people can be, there is a potential risk with people diving on them to the object. And we also know that climate change is affecting all of the shipwrecks of the lake at an alarming rate. So modeling these shipwrecks, as many of these shipwrecks as we can in the lake, will allow us to preserve the wrecks for researchers and students and for the public in the future. So additional photogrammetry of models of wrecks outside of the preserve system will allow us to continue to meet those requirements of reasonable access that I started with, while also sharing them with people who never dive, with researchers from around the world who can use this data to make new discoveries. This one is a model of a site in the preserves, the Tugboat La Valley. And these models cost about, depending on the size and depth, between $4,000 and $8,000 to create for each one, which is, it's a substantial cost, but when you look at creating a model versus opening a preserve site and maintaining it for all time, it's a really different scale of cost there. And I will wrap up by talking a little bit about an upcoming anniversary. The 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War is coming up in just a few years. And then Chris is going to talk a bit more in specific about one project we have, but we do always like to think about the Revolutionary War in context on the lake. So our team of archaeologists has done several research projects since the beginning. It's one of the foundations of our museum. Several research projects on Lake Champlain Revolutionary War sites, from the Great Bridge to Valcour Bay to the Spitfire, and this past summer, a new project in Arnold's Bay. So as we get closer to that 250th anniversary in 2026, our goal as an institution is to bring all of that together, all of that research, history, content together in new formats to make it accessible for researchers, educators, and the public. So what we're doing right now is working to assess the collections we already have and then figure out ways to digitize those and make them available to the public through our website. We'll also be creating a new museum exhibit on the Revolutionary War that will open in 2026 and hopefully continue to tour around the region. This is a painting by an artist named Ernie Haas, who painted several images of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 on Lake Champlain. And his work has really been tremendous to helping us explain these stories in vivid detail, right? We don't have photographs from it. So these are ways to recreate the Revolutionary War stories of the lake. We
So
also want to-
if I can just interrupt you and say to my committee, there will be a test on this painting shortly, so please pay very close attention to the details of this painting. Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. Senator Benning is our plant because Chris and I were setting this up. So that was good background. Thank you, Senator Benning. We also want to be sure that we are continuing to tell an inclusive story of the Revolutionary War. The stories of the Revolutionary War on the lake are often focused around battles, and that is an important part of the story. We also were looking to do new research that looks at other people who were living here, women, Indigenous people, people of color, enslaved people, and be able to bring in those fuller stories and tell a well-rounded picture of what life was like in our region as the country was in its founding years. As part of all this work, we are continuing to document the gunboat Spitfire. And while the Spitfire is technically in New York State, the boat was a crucial part of the Battle of Valcour that ended in Vermont in 1776. And it's the last remaining Revolutionary War boat in Lake Champlain. So this summer, we are going to bring in a world-renowned photogrammetry expert named Kotaro Yamafune to work with our team to create a 3D model of the Spitfire. The Spitfire is at a deeper depth than all of the open preserve sites now. So this will be something that we're trying out at depth with him and under his leadership with our team, but we're really excited about it because it will be a way for people to see the Spitfire on their computers for the first time. And then after we do our photogrammetry model, we're moving forward with looking for funding to do an in-water excavation project. So that means leaving the boat in the water and removing, documenting it underwater, taking measurements, mapping where it is, mapping out the bottom of the lake and the boat, and then removing objects out and taking them out of the water and conserving them, and hopefully using them in our new exhibit that will open in 2026. We're in the, for historians, right, the 250th anniversary is around the corner. For normal humans, 2026 is still several years away. But so we're at the, I don't want to say early stages. It's not early to us. We're in the mid stages of this whole planning project around what we're going to do on the Revolutionary War. But we're looking forward to doing it in close partnership with Vermont's 250th Commission. And our goal is really to learn more about these stories, document them in the best way we can, preserve them, and share them as widely as possible. We want to help people connect with the history that happened right here in Vermont. And we're working with Laura and her team on applications to federal agencies to support these projects as they come up. But other potential support from the state of Vermont would only help us share the incredible history of our state and the public with the public at this important anniversary. We'll also be doing a research conference coming up in mid-February. So I know you're all busy in mid-February, but we'll make sure to get the information out to you all to join us to learn more about the other research projects going on. And of course, we're happy to come back and testify as you work through the Capitol bill and the preserves come up again. We're always happy to come back and talk more about the preserves and answer any further questions that you have.
Susan, thank you very much for that. You're going to have to take the screen share down so I can see everybody. Committee, do you have any questions thus far? I do not see any hands.
Is that,
Senator Mazza, yes.
is Art Cohen still help out down there?
So Art retired from the museum and has stepped back to do he's doing some really interesting work in New York State more now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he's
got a good history with him. He's a great person. Yeah.
Yeah, he's we're lucky as our museum to have a pretty phenomenal team of founders and Art who was leading the way for a long time. And we're excited to build on that foundation of research as we're moving forward.
Yeah, he was really fun to work with. Yeah, thank you.
Senator McCormick.
Yeah, speaking of anniversaries and getting back to Windsor County, where so much of this is this discussion has happened, are we doing anything for the centennial of the Coolidge inauguration, which coming up in a couple of years?
I will turn. That is a question that maybe Laura can answer better than I can answer. If Laura, you want to chime in on that?
So the governor established the 250th commission, made the state historic preservation officer chair. So we're starting to pull all the events and commemorations together, including every bit of the state as we can, and working with our surrounding state partners.
Okay.
Any
We
other
celebrated
questions?
the
Go ahead,
celebrated the 75th anniversary with an actual reenactment at the correct time of day, which is a little rough. It was about 2 a.m, but some of us stayed up for it.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to do it at the exact time of day, like we do when President Calvin Coolidge was sworn in. We do it in the afternoon instead of 2:30 in the morning.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank
Chris, I'm assuming that since you're next on the list, I see you in the same subject category, but I'm assuming you're about to start the process of telling us what Benning did during his summer vacation.
In addition to some other things, yes.
Well, good. I need to take a 5-minute break. So committee, it's 2:10. If we could be back here at 2:15. Alex, you can leave us running live, but if folks would mute themselves and stop their videos, we'll be back at 2:15.
What's for lunch?
What do they call them? Cinnamon crunches or something. I don't know.
Mm.
Something went stale. I have to eat it.
How do you survive spending your days in a snack mecca as you do?
You control yourself very well.
Yeah.
You don't let it get ahead of you.
No.
Have you tried all the snacks that you sell?
Well, not really. I try to limit myself to what's available.
Give him until about 3:30. He's got 75% of them down.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
He gets charged double for eating the house product.
Well, the girls made salads this morning, so that's macaroni and egg and potato, and that's always a little testy there.
I love the Almighty God story so much I had to run down and tell it to my wife. That was great.
Got 2:15. Alex, we're still live, correct?
Correct. We are still live.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. We're going to branch into my funnest part of the conversation today. Susan, I want to thank you for being with us and giving us the lead up to that. Chris Sabick, you are on deck. Welcome to Senate Institutions. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here and to give you guys a little bit of a presentation about the exciting work that we're doing in Arnold's Bay. Really, currently, we're between field seasons, obviously, right now, but that doesn't mean that the work on what we found there has stopped. So I'm going to hop right into my presentation here, if I can.
Actually, Chris, if you could start by telling us who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. My name is Christopher Robert Sabick, and I'm the Director of Research and Archaeology at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, where I've had the pleasure of working for more than 2 decades now. So I've been involved with for a long time, and very excited to share some information with you about this project. Good?
You're good. Thank you, sir.
All right, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, are we seeing this Battle of Lake Champlain?
We are seeing something coming up on the screen. There we go. Battle of Lake Champlain.
Okay, hold on, let's see.
I'll just chime in too real quick before he starts because I'm going to
Yes.
pop in and out too, but I'm Sherilyn Gilligan and I'm the Assistant Director of Archaeology at the Maritime Museum. So
Thanks,
pop in.
Sherilyn.
Tells me so.
Yes,
That's
sorry,
good.
Cher. And the way this is going to flow today is I'm going to give the principal part of the presentation, and then Cher's going to chime in with some information about specifics about some of the artifacts that we found during this operation.
Just for the record, Mr. Chair, I'm across the street from Lake Champlain, okay?
I'm trying to think of a snappy comeback, but it's just
I
not
know,
coming
I
to
know,
me
I
at
know.
the moment.
It's where you found your treasure when you were heading on the beaches.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on here now, though.
Chris,
Hold on a second.
I have the PDF too, if you want me to be your presenter. I'm happy to do that.
Let me just, I run into this problem frequently when I'm using multiple screens. It says my screen is paused. I don't know why it says that. Hold on, here we go. Okay. So we're going to take a quick step back here and talk about why we're interested in doing work in Arnold's Bay. So bear with me for a few minutes while we go over a little bit of history here and start off by talking about where Arnold's Bay is located. Arnold's Bay is on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain, and it is in Addison County, just a few miles south of the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, outside of Vergennes in the town of Panton. It's a beautiful, small little bay, kind of right at the bottom end of Button Bay, which, you know, gets a little more press, I think, in general. It's not large. It's about 600 yards across and about 300 yards deep. The opening, I mean, the depth of the size of the bay itself, it's actually not very deep at all. It's only about 14 feet deep at the mouth of the bay, and it gets shallower as you come into towards the shoreline. but this was a location where, very significant historical event took place in 1776. If we back up to October 11th of 1776, this is when the Battle of Valcour Island takes place, which I'm sure you're aware that Valcour Island is located just a little bit south of Plattsburgh, New York. And this is where the American fleet met in combat with the British fleet in 1776. It was an all day long battle, started about 11 o'clock in the morning and lasted until nightfall. It was a very punishing battle for both sides, though the American fleet certainly took the brunt of the damage. And as night fell, the British fell back and attempted to blockade the Americans into this position behind Valcour Island. But through some very crafty maneuvering, the American fleet lined up single file with a lantern in the stern of each vessel, so they could only be seen from the back. And they followed each other single file through the blockading line of British vessels and escaped south undetected at that time. Now, the British awoke on the morning of October 12th to find that the American fleet had disappeared, and they could just see their topsails visible off to the south, and they set off in pursuit of them. Now, the American fleet traveled through the night of the 11th and into the morning of the 12th, stopped briefly around Schuyler Island, and then continued southward. And it was during this section of the retreat that the Spitfire, which we discussed earlier, sunk. The two fleets basically chased each other up the lake during the day on the 12th and through the night of the 12th into the 13th.
I should stop you right here, Chris, just to make sure everybody knows when you say they chased each other up the lake, you are actually talking about them moving from north to south. And
that is correct.
I don't know if people understand when they listen to stories like this, that's actually the way we treat the lake.
It is confusing. Since Lake Champlain empties northward into the St. Lawrence River through the Richelieu River, going south on Lake Champlain is considering going up the lake, and going north would be going down the lake. So it is topsy-turvy. But that's the correct usage of the terminology in this case. So as they continued to escape up the lake in the morning on the 13th, the British fleet actually caught up with the American fleet near Splitlock Mountain, Thompson Point area. And there, after a 2.5 hour long running gun battle ensued, in which the British fleet was really savaging the poor, battered, tired American vessels and their crews, obviously. As the fleet continued to flee south, Benedict Arnold, who was in command of the American fleet, realized that he was going to lose all of these vessels if he didn't do something dramatic pretty quickly, and quickly came to the decision that he needed to pull into a bay that was familiar to him, known as Ferris's Bay at the time, and there he set about destroying his vessels and escaping overland. We have the reports that Arnold left the flags flying on the vessels in a sign of defiance to the British. The American fleet at this time consisted of the row galley Congress, which was the largest of the vessels left in the American fleet, and that was Benedict Arnold's flagship. And it had 4 gunboats left in it, which these are gunboats that are sister ships to the Philadelphia, which we have the replica of at the Maritime Museum. So he drove these 5 ships as far ashore as possible. They set them alight with their flags flying, and they, all the guys jumped overboard and waded ashore with as much equipment as they could carry. Meanwhile, the British are coming across the mouth of the bay and firing shot into Ferris's Bay, as it was known at the time, and at the American troops who escaped up the bluff at the back of Arnold's Bay, Ferris's Bay, and set up a line of defense there. They wanted to make sure that the British didn't attempt to land forces to put out the fires and capture these vessels. Arnold's goal here was really to deny these, valuable vessels to the British. He realized he was going to lose them, and better to just let them burn than to let the British take them and incorporate them into their fleet. So once they determined that the vessels were fully engaged and that there was going to be no rescuing them, the American forces gathered up the Ferris family, which was the homesteading family that lived there on the bay, and for which the bay was named after. And they escaped southward to Crown Point and eventually Fort Ticonderoga. In the years after the American Revolution, the Arnold's Bay, as it became known after this obviously dramatic event that took place there in 1776, it became the home of a ferry that ran across the lake from Arnold's Bay to Westport, New York, and this was the Adams Ferry. And the road that approaches Arnold's Bay to this day is called Adams Ferry Road. And here we have a picture of a portion of the Roe Galley Congress. The family that owned the Adams Ferry, they docked their vessel right inshore of where the burned wreckage of the Congress was still sometimes visible from the lake surface. And in the late 19th century, 1890-ish, they decided to recover as much of the Congress as they could. And they ended up pulling the stern, just the back 30 or so feet off of the vessel and dragging it ashore for it to be, displayed as a curiosity of the American Revolution. And this was also done with 3 of the 4 gunboats that were burned in Arnold's Bay. They were also pulled out of the lake and displayed, sometimes dismantled, and pieces of them were used in other construction operations or to make curiosities that could be sold. And that left just the forward half of the Roe Galley Congress still in the lake. Everything else had been removed except for one of the gunboats. And that was recovered in 1952, which is the picture that's in the lower right that we're looking at now. And the gunboat that was recovered in 1952 was raised by Lorenzo Haglund, the same gentleman who raised the Philadelphia from the Valcour Bay battle site back in the 1930s. Unfortunately, this boat as well was lost to us, or lost to time, as it didn't have a proper place for it to be conserved and preserved into the future. It actually rested at the mouth of Ausable, at the Ausable River on the New York side of the lake, where Haglund had hoped to open a maritime museum in the future, and it just never came about. And eventually this vessel just rotted and was destroyed, and is now the site of a KOA campground, sitting on top of where this boat was left. So there's not a lot of vessel remains in the lake remaining, other than the forward portion of the Congress and whatever pieces, parts broke off of these various vessels when they were burned and destroyed. We have somewhat conflicting historical accounts of how the day played out on October 13th of 1776. So there are a number of questions that historians and archaeologists have about this event, and those questions are what prompted us to apply for an American Battlefield Protection Program grant from the National Park Service to gain a better understanding of what actually happened at Arnold's Bay using archaeological techniques. So if we look at it, current aerial photography of Arnold's Bay, we have a couple of landmarks that we were able to kind of center our research around. We have what's left of the Congress. Again, just kind of the forward half of the Congress, sitting kind of in the middle, but northern end of Arnold's Bay. And we also have the Ferris Homestead itself, which is down here in the southern portion of the bay. The foundation of the Ferris Homestead was located, but it had never really fallen out of history, but was examined and excavated in the 1980s because this whole shoreline is eroding back. And right now it's about a 25-foot bluff from the water line up to these farm fields. And the Ferris Homestead was eroding and falling down this bluff. So a considerable amount of archaeology was done there to document that foundation and test pitting was done around the Ferris Homestead to see if there were other structures or artifact assemblages related to the homestead site. When they were doing some of that work, they did encounter some iron canister or grape shot. And we have historical accounts of the homestead itself being hit by British cannon fire during the American retreat. So this is certainly one area that we have some conclusive evidence that there was some shot scatter in this area. And so we wanted to focus some research around this area and around the Congress remains to see what that could tell us about the events that happened on October 13th.
Chris, the term grape shot, just for those who may not be familiar, this is not a bunch of grapes that were being fired. Could you just tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, this is a grape shot, or you might hear Sherilyn or I talk about canister shot as well. These are different types of cannon ammunition. You, of course, have your normal round shot, which is just a big solid iron ball. And then for more like anti-personnel use from cannons, they would often fire grape or canister shots, which is a cluster ammunition of many small pieces of iron shot. Grape shot is arranged around a wooden or metal base, and then it's wrapped in a canvas bag, and it looks somewhat like a cluster of grapes when it's packaged that way. And canister is even smaller pieces of iron shot that are packed into a tin can, hence the name canister. And when that's fired out of the muzzle of the gun, it explodes like a shotgun shell and spreads iron shot far and wide. So they were definitely trying to knock out some of these American troops as they gathered at the top of the bluff and try to stop them from escaping south. So we have these two areas that we want to at least start our exploration of the area on, around the Ferris Homestead and around the Congress remains. So, first we established some areas that we would like to explore further. The red box here is, the area that we would love to explore in water to see what we could find. In the farm field, we have this big green box, and that includes the Ferris Homestead. Of course, we'd like to see if we have any concentrations of shot scatter or possibly evidence of this American defensive line anywhere in this area. And sandwiched between the two of them is that yellow box, and that's really the shoreline and what we refer to frequently as the transitional zone. And that transitional zone actually changes in size depending on the lake level. When this aerial photography was taken, it looks like the water was actually somewhat higher than it was when we were there in the fall. So portions of the area that we actually explored are underwater in this photograph, but were exposed when we did some work there in October of 2021. So with these three areas in mind, we went ahead with planning how to start to explore these areas in 2021, kind of our first foundational year of this project. For the in-water work, we started by establishing a couple of transects. These are just long straight lines underwater. They run generally north-south. And that's just a visual reference for us to work along this line and survey to determine if there are any artifacts there. So here on the left of this image, we have the Congress remains in that little yellow box. And then the two transects that we established, one a little further offshore, T1, and T2 is off the starboard side or the right-hand side of the Congress and extending south.
Chris, if I can stop you again, the term transit is something that I learned a lot more about this past summer. I'm just wondering if you could give us a basic outline of archaeological tools and words that the normal populace might not be familiar with.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling that to my attention, of course. A transect in this case, it's basically just a straight line that you establish along a certain compass bearing. And we stretched out for transect 1 is a 50-foot line. And it's pulled taut so that it's nice and straight. It actually has a tape measure laid along it as well, so that as you survey along the length of this line, If you find something, you can note how far along the line you are and how far off to either side of that line is the item that you found. So this is a way of covering some territory, but also keeping pretty tight locational control on the items that you find, because finding the items is great. Everybody gets excited when you find items, but it's how these items are related to each other and the other features of the wreck, the context of the artifacts, that's really the, where the story lies in archaeological excavation. So transects are a quick and easy way to establish a corridor that you're going to survey in a methodical manner. Again, this is quite shallow. We're only in about 6 or 8 feet of water. So we were able to expend a considerable amount of time with each dive working on these transects. And we did the survey using underwater metal detecting gear, which, involves you're swimming along this transect, you're sweeping the metal detector side to side. And when you hear a tone in an earpiece that you're wearing, it lets you know that you've found something metallic, and you can narrow in on that with a smaller metal detector called a pinpointer, which will really hone you into exactly where that artifact is. And then you can very carefully peel away the sediment on the bottom to expose that artifact and determine what it is and whether it's historic and needs to be documented, measured, its location measured in, and possibly recovered for conservation. So you can see the number of artifacts that we located along these transects. Each of those little pins is the location of a specific artifact. And we have color coded the artifact pins for the in-water stuff to show the different composition. The bright pink pins are nails, which, not super exciting on an individual basis, but are certainly telling us these are wrought nails. They're handmade rose head nails. So they're certainly 18th century nails. So they're telling us that we're near a shipwreck or a piece of a shipwreck or where a shipwreck might have been. And in addition to nails, we're finding lots of lead shot. We're finding some iron shot like the canister and grape we spoke about before, as well as a number of other interesting, more unique items that I'll let share with you now, I think. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. So one part of our research questions here that it was really excellent is, use of metal detecting in archaeology. So I think Chris is going to talk a little bit later about our partnership with AMDA, the group Advanced Metal Detecting for the Archaeologists that we work with for the terrestrial portion. But for the underwater portion, this is an example of some of the things we found along those transects. So in that top left portion is a boot buckle. So that would have been on a military personnel's boot, maybe fell off, maybe the, the leather is disarticulated from it, but it was closer to the shoreline there. On the right side, we see two different sizes of lead musket shot. So we can tell that the left side is that larger British size, and the smaller to the right would have been an American lead shot there. You can see in the field, when we get really excited, we're always taking pictures of these things in our hands too. And then I think there was a second slide here too. And from that first transect, one of our other divers, Ed Scullin, is seen in this picture here on the left, pulling up this 6-pounder. This was on the deeper, more central location of that first transect line that we pulled up as well. So we're getting an idea of where these artifacts are located along the transects, which once we have some more of that, and then looking at that in addition to what is on land, you get to see the greater picture of where these concentrations of different material types are. So again, an important distinction in metal detecting too is we're seeing different types in different areas. So we're getting a better picture overall of what actually happened that day, which is very exciting. Was it just those 2 slides, Chris?
I think that's it for now. We'll have you back in a
Yeah.
minute. So with the success of the in-water transects and the number of artifacts we were finding there, we really wanted to focus some of our terrestrial and shoreline work literally just inshore from this relatively rich artifact features we were finding offshore. So this aerial image here shows you an area we were certainly interested in exploring further with terrestrial metal detecting. So I would like you to just, visualize what's happening here. As if we look at where the Congress was represented by this yellow box, all of the crew members and soldiers that were aboard the Congress and the gunboats, which we assume were, run ashore near to the Congress, are jumping overboard. Sometimes they're jumping overboard into 4 or 5 feet of water, and then they're scrambling ashore. Once they get ashore, they're scrambling up this big 25 or 30.
It seems as though Chris has frozen. So while he gets back on, sure, do you want to just take over seamlessly?
Yeah,
We
of
just
course.
keep it going. That's the kind of team we have at the Maritime Museum.
Basically, we're tracking where the material culture is, right? So if you're picturing people scrambling, these are hundreds of men coming off of these boats. They're being fired upon. They're maybe setting up a place on the bluff where they can fire back. They're dropping things. Things are falling off of their equipment, right? So we're trying to get an idea by testing these different areas of where exactly we're seeing the larger concentrations of that material culture. So, as Chris was stating, those really big swaths on the map that were color coded, those were main areas that we're interested in. And then we're taking smaller sample sizes of those to actually test more intensively. And we did do a little bit of testing before we brought in the whole class that Senator Joe Benning got to take with us, so that we really had better ideas of where to concentrate people. And a different use of transects in that regard, which I can speak to, we had very specific transects underwater. So not only did we not lose our place and our visibility, and we could cover enough ground, but for metal detecting with many people, you also need distance from other machines, and you want to make sure you have really great coverage, full coverage of a sample area. So those more arbitrary transects were sort of, they were a little more like echo lines off the shoreline, just to make sure people stayed in their row and were able to get as much coverage as they could.
Cher, Chris is back on with us now. And Chris,
Okay.
just so you know, Cher has done a seamless job of walking through your testimony. I've been waiting all along for my committee to start groaning when they heard the words metal detecting. They might have figured out where we were going with this conversation. But I'm not sure who wants to pick up the conversation here.
Okay, let me attempt to share this.
Yeah, let's see if you can keep getting that screen up.
Is that showing up now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so we've identified this area, and as Cher mentioned, we divided it into transects in the field, long, straight transects, while those along the shoreline were more contour based. We followed the shoreline, but had people spread apart so that they weren't having conflicting signals from their various machines and things of that nature. And here we have an image of the work being done along the shoreline. And you can see that each of these little flags marks the location of an artifact that was found using the metal detectors. And if you look way in the back, see this guy in orange right here? I think that's our fair side.
I see him. I noticed.
This is a good place to mention that the terrestrial portion of this metal detecting program was presented as a class. And it was presented in conjunction with the advanced metal detecting for the archaeologist group that Sharon mentioned earlier. And we brought together a really amazing group of 25 people that wanted to participate in this program. And that included, of course, the advanced metal detecting for the archaeologist folks, Senator Benning. We had a representative from the Division for Historic Preservation there. That's Yvonne, who's in the picture on the right here, working up in the field adjacent to this shoreline image.
Hope you charge Senator Benning to be there.
Well,
What'd
he
you
was one
find-
of our experts,
what'd you
so
find?
he was able to bring his expertise to bear and actually help.
Ooh, what'd you
some-
Yeah,
find?
it was a great mix of people who were very experienced with metal detectors and folks who were learning for just the first time. So it was a really excellent group of folks to work together with.
We had students from Castleton University, from SUNY Plattsburgh, from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, of which Sherilyn is a graduate. We had a local teacher participate who had participated in an online professional development course we did about the American Revolution earlier in the year. We had the director of the Kent Delord House over in Plattsburgh participated, as well as museum staff, current staff and former staff. So it was really quite an amazing crew of.
We also got to work with our partners with the Stockbridge Muncie. So we had Nathan Allison there, who's the TIPO, who was also a big part of our symposium that we're going to do on this whole project, which Chris will talk a little bit more about later.
Absolutely. So it was a really great experience for everyone. I personally,
I want to throw in here, Chris, that you also had, if any of you watch American Antiques Roadshow, we had one of the instructors was the munitions and military expert that they bring on the show all the time. So we were really fortunate to be able to pull items out of the ground and have him identify them instantly.
Yes. That gentleman's name is Joel Bohe, and he appears on Antiques Roadshow with some regularity. And does this kind of as a sidelight with the advanced metal detecting for the archaeologist group. He works all across the country. And in fact, Cher and I are hoping to work with them at Valley Forge later, in 2022. So carrying on here, I think, this overhead view here shows all of the artifacts that were located both in the field adjacent to the Congress site and on the shoreline. And you can see that there's quite a number of pieces that were found here. Now, not every one of these is historic, and we have yet to sort them and color code them the way I did with the underwater finds, because there's just a lot more of them to deal with.
We're still post-processing all of this data. It was a lot of material. So,
but a large number of musket balls and other associated military pieces, and certainly 18th century pieces were found during this portion of the program as well. And I think Cher can tell us about a few of those as well.
Yeah, so I believe it was you, Senator Joe Benning, who found this particular lead piece up at the top left. So
which I'll have to say, I was ready to throw back out in the lake as a piece of junk until I took it to the expert and I said, you know what this is?
And it's awesome that you did that too. And we're all there to learn. And, it's a very small piece of lead. It's pretty unassuming, but because we did have an expert there, he immediately knew this is a flint holder. This is a folded piece of lead that would have held the flint in place for, it makes it more secure in the jaws of the lock for a flint loaded musket, which you can see down at the bottom. Chris put in there that molded piece of lead around the flint, just really holds it secure in place right there. Really cool piece. Joel was overexcited about this, and that was a exciting piece for the day. And then to speak more about the canister shot too, at the bottom right there, you see two sizes. Again, what's often called grape shot is that larger bit there that would have been in some kind of fabric bag tied around a post. And the smaller shot really just like packed into a case and shot from a cannon that way. So very cool material culture. Again, metal detecting specifically for battlefield sites like this can be very telling, and it's pretty cool work to do. But it's also, learning the context of all of this scatter is very important to be able to communicate exactly what's going on at the site. which, something that we really like to communicate with the public too, is this has been a popular site for picking for a very long time, even in the 1890s while they're pulling boats out, right? People are really interested in this stuff. And when little bits of it start to disappear, the overall picture disintegrates. And we are able to learn less collectively about what actually happened in a place at a time.
All right. In addition to that, thank you, Sharon. In addition to that, really intensive work that we did just ashore of the Congress remains, we also did a couple of hours of work around and behind the Ferris Homestead at the southern end of our survey area. And this is an area that we probably want to return to and expand, but in the process of doing a few transects here behind the Ferris Homestead, we did encounter more grape and canister shot in this area, which confirms our historical accounts of rounds that were coming in towards the homestead itself and then landing in the field around and behind it. So certainly a really interesting piece there. We had the great work that was done up at the northern end of the lake, of the bay. And so you might be wondering what's to do next, or what are we going to do in 2022? And I think if we look at an overall map of the site and how much of it we've actually had the opportunity to survey so far, you can see that there's still plenty to do here to gain a better understanding of what happened on October 13th of 1776. This large area in the center of the field has had a significant amount of landscaping, land shaping that was done here since in the 20th century. So there's a large portion of this that has been scraped off and regraded, and we won't find historic artifacts in those locations, unfortunately. And you can see we've done a certain amount of surveying in this area already, and all of these finds are modern in nature. But certainly there's lots more to do inland, kind of north and a little bit east of the Ferris Homestead itself. And there's a tremendous amount of area on the shoreline and in the water itself to cover. So those are the goals for 2022. In addition to continuing the metal detector survey, both on land, on the shoreline, and in the water, we hope to receive a permit from Navy History and Heritage Command to uncover the remains of the Congress, so they can be fully documented and recorded. Undoubtedly, we will use both measurements and drawings to do that, but we'll also employ photogrammetry for many of the same reasons that Susan indicated earlier with the preserve sites and the other wrecks in the lake. Creating three-dimensional models of these structures really does an impressive job of capturing that detail from that specific moment in time and making it available for future reconstructions as well as monitoring. If you come back and make a model of this same structure in 10 years, you can be able to compare the two and actually see what changes, what environmental damage has happened to these structures over time. So still lots of work to do, lots of ground to cover, and I think a lot of history to reveal, refine, and really give us a better understanding of the very dramatic events that happened here in the early foundational period of the United States. And most importantly to me is to get a real understanding of the people who were involved, both from the vessels, the homesteaders that were living at the Ferris Homestead or the Kellogg Homestead, which is just a little bit north of the bay here. Really, as Susan mentioned earlier, creating a more well-rounded understanding of the events that happened here. So I would just wrap it up with a picture of the entire metal detecting crew that took part in the terrestrial and shoreline excavation, metal detecting surveys. It really was, it's a pretty magical place. It's really a beautiful spot in Addison County. And we had just such a great group of people and great conditions to carry out this work and produced tremendous results, which we are still working through and will continue to work through for the next couple of years.
I knew our chair would be in the picture. I understand that.
Of course.
Let's see. Fourth from the right standing, in case you missed it.
Yep.
Oh, no, we want to make sure that
We could see the halo.
we wonder
Yeah,
why
thanks.
we wondered why you had this on today. Now we know. Okay.
So the other things I'd love to mention here is that, if we work on the Congress remains, that vessel still is considered property of the U.S. Navy. So that's why we're going through the permitting process with them to get access to the Congress remains. So this is an exception to the Abandoned Shipwreck Act that Susan mentioned earlier in our presentation. Any shipwreck that is sunk in state waters belongs to that state, unless it was a federally flagged vessel at the time that it sank, in which case it still belongs to the government whose flag it was flying when it sank. So U.S. Navy vessels still belong to the U.S. Navy. If we were to find a Royal Navy vessel that sank while it was still in the possession of the Royal Navy, it would actually still belong to the British government, and they would have management authority over it. So we are applying for that permit from them. The rest of this archaeological process is permitted through the Division of Historic Preservation. And we're overly excited about our continued collaboration with them and their participation in this process, and their support, which is instrumental in making these things happen. So it's a challenging permitting environment when you have to deal with the Navy. But hopefully we'll be able to get that squared away so that we can really learn more about the Congress itself, which is something we've never seen, archaeologically speaking, never seen a row galley or the remains of a row galley. So it'll be interesting to learn how that boat was constructed, how it was made, and how it compares to the gunboats that we do have some archaeological examples and information on.
I would also say too, excuse me, go ahead.
If you could take down the screen share so we can all see each other, it would be appreciated.
I just wanted to plug, that's fine. I just wanted to plug again that we're going to have that virtual conference where I think we have 5 presenters. We may pick up a few more as people are more interested in joining that. And of course, all of you are welcome to join that as well. It'll go a lot more in depth into different portions of this project too, but are we ready for questions at this?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I do.
Okay.
The $64,000 question. What happened to all the artifacts?
Well, the artifacts are currently being photographed and documented. Selected artifacts will go through a conservation process if they're particularly diagnostic or interesting, so that they can be displayed and interpreted to the public. Others that are deemed to be less diagnostic in that way will be returned to the site and buried on site.
You've retained the satellite location for each artifact?
Yes.
And you have the ability to zoom in on the pictures we've been shown. You have the ability to zoom in and point exactly to each artifact as it was retrieved.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing, one of the amazing things with modern technology. And, with each of these transects that we establish, both on land and in the water, right, we get accurate GPS points at the beginning and end of each of those lines. And then we're able, with the measurements that we've taken underwater or on land, we're able to determine how far along that line that artifact was located, and whether it's off to the east or west or whatever the case may be, and how far that is. So we don't necessarily we didn't take the GPS to every single point in the water. We did do that on land, but we're able to really pinpoint those locations that way and present them on these digital images.
So Laura and Scott and I have had this conversation before. I'm still trying to swallow the appreciation for why artifacts would be placed back in the ground. What's the rationale there?
Well, the rationale is that it costs money to conserve and curate these things in perpetuity. And so, our modus operandi here is to collect a representative sample of the different artifact types and the ones that are particularly diagnostic or informative. There's only so many square-headed nails that one needs to retain to properly interpret a site. And if we've captured the information about where it was found, have pictures of it and measurements, then that's really the most information we're going to gain from that object individually in the long run. So once that information is captured, there's no need to incur the expense of conserving and curating that piece in perpetuity. That's my take on it. Is that what you and Laura and Scott think as well?
Oh, I'd love to hear the answer from you guys, so please jump in. Scott, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. I thought if I pushed my space bar down, it didn't mute still. But I mean, again, Chris, I don't really know what your protocol for what you're discarding and not is. I mean, that's part of it. He kind of outlined it, Senator, in the sense that diagnostic artifacts, any kind of diagnostic artifacts would remain as part of the collection and be retrievable in a curation situation, and obviously all the locational data. I would, in terms of normal protocol under our guidelines, the modern artifacts that were recovered from the site, which were taken from the field, those would be discarded generally because they don't have that kind of value. I wasn't really aware that perhaps things like square nails were being discarded. It really depends on the protocol and the particular project protocols of what kind of retention occurs there. But
right, and to be clear, discarded meaning they're going to be reinterred at the site.
Right.
Modern debris, of which we found a copious amount, will be discarded. Bottle caps, shotgun shells, modern nails, because apparently there were about 10,000 duck blinds built in Arnold's Bay over the last 50 years, and they've all fallen apart and left their little wire nails everywhere. So, a large part of what Sherilyn is principally doing right now is sifting through all of that all of those artifacts and determining which ones are most relevant to the study. But yes, to be clear,
You see a little bit of my working home lab behind me.
oh yeah, we're having some audio issues, Sharon, or I am anyway.
Yeah, you were in the max headroom stage. Sheriff, if you want to go out and come back, that might be the best way to do it.
The other thing I would add about artifacts is we don't want to remove everything from their context, because then we're no longer able to tell that story. So we figure out what needs to be removed, whether it's for mitigation purposes for a construction project or something, or like Chris was saying, we have enough to be able to study and learn, and we leave the rest alone, so that those sites are not destroyed. And someday when there's even better technology, we can go back and study and learn more.
Absolutely. It really is sampling. It's not, I think it's unrealistic to expect through any excavation technique that you're going to recover 100% of the artifacts at any site. You really want a sample that tells the story.
What struck me here was that the actual preservation of the images of where things were found told the story of context. And once you reach a saturation point, there is an excess amount that's now being returned to the ground. And it may be just me, but I'm really uncomfortable about the idea of something going back into the ground that could either be stolen or end up totally destroyed with time. I'm not sure where to go with that, frankly, but I think Chris used the term, there's only so many nails. What value may be gained by, in a class like the one that was there, if you have so many excess nails, give each kid a nail for the memory. Is there something that is wrong with that approach in a structured environment like that? I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing that out there to think about, because I know every one of those kids that was there would love to have some memory to cherish. And when I hear that things are being put back into the ground that are, especially nails, likely to disintegrate over time, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I don't want to stand in the way of proper thought, I guess, or politically correct thought. Just throwing that out there for conversation.
I can see that point of view, understandably. And I don't know that I have a response, in opposition or support of such a thought.
One of the odd quirks of our laws as they currently exist is that there is a provision for somebody who is retrieving artifacts from the water may be able to gain some of those artifacts, or in fact be compensated by the state. There's no such provision in terrestrial diggings. And I don't know how to resolve that conflict without opening up a can of worms that may take us in directions we just don't want to go. But it's one of the quirks in the present status of the law. I guess I'll
I think
leave it
in
at
this
that.
particular case, because the terrestrial portion is on private land, the landowners donated that material to the museum. But I also think, some of the issues that arise with passing out some of those artifacts, like you said, would be reburied on site is, it perpetuates the desire to have a piece of that material culture from the site, right? Like it then in turn could encourage people to go out and pick that site on their own, which is something that we try to avoid. So I don't know, it's tricky.
Yep.
To be honest, Senator, to just jump in on the last one, and we'll obviously work this out and provide additional information to you. I don't believe that the division is in support of reburial of any artifacts that are retrieved from that have historical context.
Okay.
So,
Well, this is something that we can discuss further, Scott.
yeah.
Question?
No, I'd love to see that conversation go, because if you rebury them, you provide incentive for some later potential nefarious individual to come along and seek them. If the message is out that this site has been cleaned through a process governed by the state, it's highly unlikely that somebody else would come along looking to dig there.
Chair Benning,
so-
Chair Benning, do you
Sure.
have an expensive piece that you've got collected? You want to sell it now?
Well, not from this particular site, but the artifacts that I've collected, Nick, I am committed to making sure they end up in a museum where the public can actually see them. I don't have any desire to sell anything. These are the things that I've been digging up, or what I consider to be part of Vermont's history. And by the way, I am doing it on private land, and I'm getting permission from the landowner before I do that. But what I dig up, the thought of putting it back into the ground is absolutely abhorrent to me. But if I'm going to hang on to it, it's going to be for me looking at it and thinking that was a nice memory. Senator McCormick, you had your hand up.
Thanks. If the trustees of the taxpayers' money were to provide you with a warehouse, would you still be burying artifacts, or would you put them in the warehouse?
I think that if the storage facilities were available and there was the funding to support the conservation and long-term curation, then yeah, we would probably be more inclined to hold on to them. And as I guess I'm realizing now with the discussion with Scott, we need to have some more thought around this procedure anyway. In the case of preparing the preserve sites for opening, as Susan discussed in our earlier discussion, there might still be some logic about, burying those artifacts on site, removing the temptation for them to be grabbed, by divers and just burying them on site for future recovery and conservation curation. And I think that perhaps Cher and I have been applying that mentality to Arnold's Bay site, in which case may not be the absolute correct way to do that. So we will have some ongoing discussions with our good partners at the Division of Historic Preservation.
Yeah.
on how to proceed with
I
it.
remember years ago, Giovanna Peoples was the state archaeologist. She stressed that it was a real misuse of artifacts to use them as collector's items or curiosities, but that they were not in and of themselves always as important as the location. She
Absolutely.
mentioned the Sketchewog site and near Springfield, where she said the real treasure there was simply a layer of carbon where geologically carbon would not show up, indicating that someone had had a fire there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was information that
Context
said a lot.
really is the key, right? The
Yeah.
analogy that we often make is that an archaeological site is like a crime scene, and that the individual artifacts are the various clues that occur in a crime scene. And if those individual clues start to be removed from their proper location or disappear altogether, then the story of what happened at that crime scene is diminished or is made more unclear. And that's very much the principle we work on here. We're talking about finding musket balls and nails. They're really not that exciting on an individual basis. But if we look at the way the nails and the lead shot and the melted lead are distributed along one of our transects, we start to get the idea that maybe that transect is crossing over where one of the gunboats was burned and sank. So,
if you put
a melted blob of lead is just a melted blob of lead, but when we connect it with everything else, we start to get an idea of what happened at that spot. So,
but if you put it all back 1,000 years from now, people digging it up are likely to be confused as to what happened there.
that is true. But
I
hopefully
think
they'll
that's
have all the
further
report to work with.
that's further exacerbated by the decision to preserve some of the artifacts in a museum, because now the total context of the site has been disrupted. So somebody 1,000 years or 100 years from now coming back to redo that site is only going to find parts of what was actually on the site. So context is now totally disrupted. And
It is.
I don't know where I'm going with this conversation, other than I'm hoping that the players on this screen are all talking to each other about the wisdom of all of this.
Sure.
Part of this conversation with this committee is the recognition that there are artifacts that do need preservation and do need storage space. And all of you are involved in that conversation in a way that I hope at least we've planted some seeds to talk about that further into the future. Luckily for you guys, I'm not going to be chair of this committee after the next election. So my hope is that you guys continue this conversation. And if I happen to wander in as a plain citizen, I hope you'll keep me involved in the loop, because I'm really fascinated by all this. And I really do love the experience of being out there checking all this stuff out.
I heard that Mazda's bought a detector, so we'll probably.
Well, he could get rid of those cars in his garage. The state would have a whole big storage facility right there.
I'm looking for a car detector for old cars.
I was actually
Any other-
thinking of Maz's garage, actually.
Yeah. Any other questions for our guest this afternoon? Ladies and gentlemen, I personally have really enjoyed the conversation. I was looking forward to this for some time. So thank you all very much for coming. Oh, one last question, Chris. With respect to that particular piece of Flint Holder, is that one of the things being preserved, or did that go back in the ground?
That will absolutely be one of the pieces that's held on to. And to be clear, nothing has been
Nothing's
returned to
gone
the
back yet.
ground at this point. We're still in the
still
process.
processing.
Is it true that they called that the Benning piece? Is it true? That's what
That is not true.
okay.
I'll
But
tell you,
maybe from here forward, it will be.
Don't give him credit.
When I picked that up, Laura, your assistant was with me at the time and we're both staring at it. And I should say publicly that your assistant told me that she was sent to be my companion in what we were checking out so that I wouldn't take anything. And you were trying to make sure that didn't happen. I say that in jest, but that was what she said. She said she was sent there to watch me.
You probably brought it with you, Joe.
Right.
That's exactly right. She's a very experienced and excellent archaeologist. So we wanted to make sure we could educate you when we had the
Yes.
opportunity.
And you did. She's very knowledgeable and I appreciated that effort. But I have to say to all of you that holding something like that in your hand, knowing how connected you are to a group of soldiers or sailors, if you want to call them that, are dropping things like that in the water as they're fleeing for their lives up that embankment. That was a really powerful moment. And I hope everybody at some point gets a chance to pick up something like that at the museum and just think about the context of what was going on. Thank you very, very much for the opportunity. Committee, thanks a lot for hanging around this afternoon and listening to my spiel. But that will conclude our business. Alex, you can take us off of YouTube.